Slide, Achieving Transparency in Organizational Culture Using No-Cost Automations. University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Achieving Transparency in Organizational Culture Using No-Cost Automations. With us today, we have Sarah Corpy and Alan Ng, and they both love pineapple on pizza.
Well, at least
So
we don't mind it.
you don't mind it. Yeah, I personally don't mind it, but I would never admit that publicly on a recording. All right, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Like Nate said, I'm Sarah Corpy. I'm happy to be here today with Alan Ng to talk about how we helped increase transparency in organizational culture using no-cost automations in the Division of Continuing Studies. So if we go forward to the agenda
Slide.
um, we're going to start by providing a little bit of background context, and then Alan's going to walk you through the DCS Pulse Survey Automation Project, and I'll walk you through the All Staff Email Automation Project, and then we do have some time for questions at the end. So let's hop right into background context on the next slide.
Slide.
So just to kind of situate everyone here, the Division of Continuing Studies is a division in the institution that has the mission of advocating for and engaging lifelong learners through high quality, innovative programs and services. We have a high percentage of remote employees. We do have a small footprint on campus at 21 North Park, but most people who work in the division work either fully or at least partially remote. We have a strong history and culture of inclusion and dedication to the mission, but we have relatively few staff to run a very diverse array of programs and services. So we have a lot of tiny silos of highly specialized work. And so this is kind of our divisional context. And then we have been offering climate surveys. Most recently, the climate survey that we've offered for the last 3 rounds of biannual climate surveys was co-created by people in the division who were interested in participating in the climate survey creation process. We had been using the Wisely faculty climate survey prior to the creation of this climate survey. However, we don't have many faculty members. And so results of the climate survey were confusing because we didn't know how people were answering certain questions. We don't have a ton of academic units. We don't have program chairs, for example. So the questions didn't quite fit our context. And so that's why we created our own climate survey that we have been offering every other year for the past 6 years. And then we took questions from the climate survey to use in the Pulse survey that Alan's going to be talking about. So one other quick note, I'm the Director of Organizational Development at the Division of Continuing Studies, and Alan is the Director of Information Technology at the Division of Continuing Studies. And I think I'm going to hand it over to you now, Alan. I think you're muted, Alan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just asking could we jump forward 2 slides, please?
Slide.
Yeah, unmuting is first problem to solve. Thank you for helping me recognize the problem that fits the theme of today of the formula we're going to sell today. Discover, design, develop. There we just discovered a problem and fixed it. So the climate survey that Sarah just described, it happens every 2 years. And after a couple of years of that, and our leadership, and there was the Wisely one before that, we have a long-term history of the leadership and division wanting to do something with the results. But with every 2 years of data, how do you know what you do is working? What you do is working or not? Is it going the right direction or the wrong direction? And so the Pulse survey was trying to solve that problem of getting visibility into those same questions, but on a more regular basis. And we know we all have the problem of survey fatigue. So the solution that the climate committee came up with years ago was a pulse survey idea. What if we ask one question once a week, and the question will change every week? So some of these climate survey questions we would like to ask quarterly, some maybe monthly, even some annually or semi-annually, and then a climate committee formed or had a subcommittee that ran just this pulse survey. And so that was in place. So I'm describing sort of the current state now. We had a weekly survey going out, and a small group of people would meet once a week, and all they did was the logistics of doing all the clicking and copy pasting and writing to get the survey out. And then every 3 months or so, every quarterly, they would try and do something with that data and like go digging around in Qualtrics and try and assemble a data report and do some analysis and try and remember whatever they did 3 months ago to be consistent with that. It was all extremely manual and time consuming. So you could say that the Pulse Surveys committee work was really just a lot of clicks and pasting and very little time talking about climate or doing something about climate, which is probably not satisfying to anybody. But I didn't know that. At that point, I was just a DCS employee answering these one question surveys, and a manager who was responsible, at least for my team's culture and the larger culture in which my team works. And I felt like I was answering these questions and wondering what everybody else's answers were, and wondering what's actually happens to them. I don't remember whether the quarterly reports were something we saw, but it certainly was not immediate gratification or motivation to even fill in the survey if it's going into a black hole. So that's the status quo. Let's jump ahead to, I think, the next slide is the main meat of our presentation here. We're going to offer a little formula, which is familiar to those of you who've studied many other processes, whether it's agile development or the ADDIE process in instructional design or design thinking. So more or less the same themes. But the three verbs that we want to pick out today are discover, design, and develop, which is both a three-step process and an introduction to a cycle. And so I just described as the beginning of the discover process, discovering the future state. The framework of our story here is these three verbs, and then Sarah's going to walk you through how she applied it as well. And then 3 principles that I suggest making that are unique to particularly an automation project are that human behavior is hard to change. So the less you have to change it, the more likely you're going to succeed. 2, there's a quote here, make the requirements less dumb, which I borrowed from an engineering leader in a different industry, which is a fun way of reminding ourselves that, especially in the technology trades, like the attendees today mostly are, that it's fun to solve technical challenges, but it's not always relevant. So watch out, keep your self-awareness. Like, am I solving this because it's a fun technical challenge, or is it because it's actually the smart way to solve the problem? And often you set yourself, or even sometimes the customers who are not technologists have given you requirements, which are way too specific. You're not understanding the higher level problem. You get distracted by the requirements. And instead of going down the rabbit hole of solving those, question the requirements and make them less dumb. And the third one for automation is that it's fun as a technologist to build something that it may seem easy to you. Like if you just need to, every month or so, you just need to tweak this one little thing. Your solution will end up completely useless if nobody does that one little thing. Especially, it doesn't seem so easy to somebody who's not an IT person. So that was the sort of 3 principles we brought into this. So on to the next slide. Get to the discover story in more detail. And a lot of discovery is, we know, those of you trained in business analysis or requirements gathering or process redesign or process improvement, know a lot of it's people work. So first I perceived the problem just as a customer, and I was careful not to come in as an IT director. Instead, I came in just as a customer and a colleague in the DCS, and I joined the climate committee as a peer, just saying, hey, can I join? I'm not coming in here to say you're doing things wrong. I'm coming in here to think, I'd like to help, because maybe I can contribute something that will make your work easier for you. And I started what they say and call it in Six Sigma training back 20 years ago. Walk the process, like in the manufacturing factory floor. If you're going to improve a process, walk the process. So I did that with them. I participated in the hands-on manual clicking and copy pasting, and really explored the status quo and understood both the people, what they like, what they don't like, the tools they're using, where problems are happening because things are not automated, and where the manual part seems to add value and should probably stay manual. And that let me formulate a future vision. So if we could jump back 2 slides to slide 5. Now I had a future state to describe versus the current state, and try and get the very first gatekeeper function of any project like this, which is to get the people on board. So once I could now describe, as a peer member of the committee who had been in the trenches with them in the current state, say, what if you could spend 0 of your time on all these logistics? You could instead spend your time working on climate issues. What if all of the staff who are currently maybe losing interest in clicking these 1-question surveys could immediately see what all their colleagues are also responding on the same question? And what if you didn't have to do that quarterly report anymore? Instead, that report was already done for you constantly. It's available on demand to anybody who wanted it. And you're probably not surprised that people are on board. I'm going to jump ahead now to the design. Slide 8, please.
Slide, design. A bullet point list.
So I gathered all that information, classic requirements gathering, except now instead of having to build a whole design team, maybe in the old ways of automating things, I had my design assistant. I don't remember what AI assistant I used back in 2023, but I described context, because as you know, if you give garbage in, garbage out, if you don't give great context to AI, you don't get a great answer. So I could describe the business problem, the current state, the future state, the tech stack, the human preferences, what's both which aspects of the process they wanted to keep manual, which tools they like, which tools they were willing to wiggle on. The fact that I was available as a technical person to do a one-time implementation, but I didn't want to be involved in again. I know the tech stack. That's what I was finally putting on my IT director hat, and both to reassure the people that I'm confident we can do this, and then that telling the AI assistant, here's what will be allowable for this class of data. And the AI, it was a very short conversation, really. Once you give it a great context, it gave me the solution design, told me, yes, this is possible. All these, here's the components, how they can talk to each other. And here's the ones, probably 50 lines of JavaScript or Google Apps script you'll need to do the automation. So next slide, please, is the develop slide.
Slide.
And here follows your standard agile process of a minimum viable product. Get feedback early and often on everything you do, and test one small function, small, continuous improvement, as we heard in Lindsay Bowen's presentation this morning. That was great. A lot of common ground between this and that, actually, at an abstract level. First, how are we gonna build these forms, and do some trial and error with AI telling me exactly what to click, because I don't use these forms, any of these tools on a daily or weekly or even monthly basis. So it was great for telling you gotta dig down deep in this menu and that menu, etc. And then, so we solved the problem of how are we going to get the committee to be able to schedule these questions in a single sheet, just picking a drop down from the question and a date that they want that question to go out. So automated that process so that there's a way to get a link that has the right question and responses in it, and the question unique to each date. And then automate the step of let's kind of step 2 there, the sending of that. And that was again in Google Apps script, where the script is automatically runs on a trigger you set in Google Apps script. The committee decided every Tuesday, I think at 7 a.m. And then how are we going to get the responses all collected in sheets that will be divvied up in a way that Google Data Studio will be ready to use them. And then how do we connect all that to Google Data Studio and build the visualizations, a different pie chart or chart, bar chart for each question. So you get a time series. And I didn't want anybody to have to tweak the visualization years later as the scope of data grew. If we only had 3 data points for like the last 3 questions, and then in a few years we'll have 30 data points, they won't have to redesign the visual. So that was all auto scaling in the Google Data Studio side. People were involved all the way along at every feedback point, both not only to test that it works, but their own role in it. Like, how are we going to add a question in the future when Alan's not around? What if we want to change a question or delete a question, or make sure that they were involved in? I didn't write the instructions for them. I said, you're going to understand your own documentation much better if you write it now, knowing what you need to know, because your future self will thank you. When 3 years from now, when I won't remember either, how do you add a new question to this thing anyways? Let's just go back and read our documentation from back then. So that's the development cycle. And I think I'm about out of time there. So let's go to the next slide and show you the end results.
Slide.
So if you could click, Melissa, if you could click that link. See what happens. And then share. Yeah, great.
The survey opens in a web browser.
And then scroll on the left bar down to value and respect.
Clicks.
That was a question that was scheduled for last May. Oops, can you make that? We can see it. That'd be great. Yeah, do that. No, great. So May 2026 was the last time it was asked. You can see long-term trends. Like overall, we're pretty stable, but there is a trend that the division between strongly agree, the blue, and the teal agree is long-term trend in a negative direction. So the climate committee's work is now they can ask the substantial question, like, what do we want to do about that, if anything? What could we do about it? And at that point, we're back to achieving, the whole thing we were here for, which is improving the DCS work culture. And so on that note, I'll hand it over to Sarah Corpy.
Thank you so much. Working through this automation process with Alan, I was wondering if we might use pieces of the automation project for the pulse surveys to solve a different problem entirely. And if we could go back to the presentation on slide 12, we had an interesting problem around the all staff meetings. If we could go on to the next slide.
Slide. The problem we faced.
Okay. So we hold 2 to 3 all staff meetings every year. And the way that we invite people to the all staff meetings at the time was that the dean's executive assistant individually emailed every supervisor in the division with the names of the people who they supervise and the all staff meeting attendance modality that those people historically had used, either in person or online. And then there was a request for confirmation, and how those details were confirmed changed every meeting. And so the result of that was that supervisors either missed the email entirely or they didn't follow the response instructions correctly. And then the executive assistant would follow up individually with supervisors and had some very elaborate spreadsheets going on. once we had the modality information for each individual staff member, then the executive assistant would email through BCC two separate groups with two separate sets of registration instructions. One set of registration instructions for people who were going to attend in person, we thought, and the other set for people who we thought would be attending virtually. Every email address got entered into those emails manually. And then staff who wanted to change their attendance modality or forgot to register or didn't register correctly or had a change in registration would follow up individually with the executive assistant who then added additional information to the spreadsheets. And so that to me seemed like a lot. And so if we hop ahead to the next slide, the automation recipe here was to discover or better understand the problem, to design, to clarify intentions, and then to develop using kind of that agile cycle again, something that would be more efficient and more effective. Along the way, we wanted to, again, acknowledge human behavior is hard to change. There was a lot of change. Every all-staff meeting, the process was different, and so there was a lot of confusion. We wanted to, again, make the requirements less dumb and assume minimal staff capacity for maintenance. So if we go ahead to the next slide in the discover phase, I was perceiving a problem of heightened stress regarding registration for the all-staff meeting. And registration is not usually something that causes a lot of stress and anxiety. And so I wanted to understand what was going on there a little bit better. So I launched a project with the learning engineering design specialists and the dean's executive assistant. We clarified the problems that were happening with the registration process and defined an ideal future state. The tools that were used at the beginning of the project were Excel, Sheets, as well as an external registration tool that required a password, but did not use a NetID and was not an enterprise tool. And then lots of manual work again. And I was thinking in terms of the pulse survey automation. We were able to automate the sending of the pulse survey to everyone on staff every week. So I thought there might be a way to automate this all staff meeting invitation as well. I do have some old familiarity with HTML coding, and I was hopeful and maybe less confident than Alan that a solution was likely out there. If we want to hop back to slide 12, I want to just describe our ideal future state here. What we were hoping for is less manual time, less manual processes and less time-consuming processes for sending the emails. We really wanted the instructions to stay the same from meeting to meeting, so that supervisors weren't confused about what to do. And then, so we thought we would only require a supervisor to respond if a change was needed. So if we didn't hear anything, no news is good news. And then the invitation emails to the staff members would be sent using less manual time and less time processes. And again, we wanted the registration instructions to stay the same meeting to meeting. So if we jump ahead to slide 15 for our design, I crafted an AI prompt in late 2024 that included the business problem to solve and the end state vision. I included the pulse survey automation script that we use for sending the pulse survey emails. And then my assumptions were use UW enterprise tools and assume zero technical skills from anyone touching it. But I kind of thought that I could ping Alan when I got stuck to troubleshoot issues. I'm not sure that Alan knew that at the time, but he was definitely a part of my plan. And then on the next slide in our develop phase, we developed and tested one function at a time. So we first tested how to pull the employee name and the supervisor name. And then we tested how to incorporate meeting modality as well. So we had one Google Sheet that had a list of all employees, all supervisors, and expected meeting attendance. And then the automation pulled information from that sheet to customize emails to each individual supervisor. And then we also automated the sending of the invitations to all staff. And then to ensure that invitations could go out on time if someone was out of office, the send button in the sheet was set up so that it would always look like the executive assistant was sending the email, but anyone with access to the sheet could click the send button. Right. So we were able to actually automate the sending of these all staff emails, which I think was quite a feat. And I did really appreciate Alan and his willingness to troubleshoot things. And I was like, I don't know why the code isn't working. And then he was very willing to hop in and help. If we can go ahead 2 slides, we'll kind of summarize briefly our outcomes and insights. So things that worked well for us. The automation significantly reduced manual effort and also errors. We had really strong collaboration between roles, including IT, leadership, the executive assistant, and in my role as well. Because we had shared access to Google, the Google Suite, delegation became more possible. And so we have more sustainable processes because of that. What surprised us was actually how easily we could adapt existing scripts for new use cases. Sending pulse surveys and sending individually customized emails to everyone on staff don't sound like they would use the same script, but it was actually surprisingly easy to adapt. And our time savings were greater than anticipated. I think the next steps would really be exploring additional automations for other repetitive tasks. And our key takeaway for you today is that small process improvements can have a big impact when they are paired with the right tools and cross-team collaboration. So we did have a discussion prompt, and I know we're getting short on time. But our discussion prompt on the next slide, just something for you to think about moving forward is how might you apply this model to your own workflows? Where could automation and collaboration help you move from problem to impact faster? And then I think we have just maybe 2-ish minutes left. We can see if there are any questions for us in the chat. I see a question for you in the chat, Alan.
Yeah, I see that. Sam asked a great question about partnering to take ownership of maintenance tasks and documentation. The difficulties, I think I didn't run into them, but only because I had done all that prep work, people work to join the committee. They knew what I knew. They knew that I joined from the get-go, knowing I'm a temporary committee member and I'm not owning the solution long term. So when they even agreed to launch this, they I think I don't remember exactly how I presented it, but it was 3 years ago. But they knew that they were not gonna have zero maintenance. In fact, the way I think I sold it is more control. You are going to maintain control of this. You have choices of like when the wording on the questions and the responses, and if you want control, with like Spider-Man says, and you have some responsibilities to go with that. You can have zero control and zero responsibilities, but you want control. So here's the responsibilities, and it did take a hand holding on the documentation, all practice, like me modeling the first one. Like, so here's what a good documentation process for like that. Here's how to add a question. Now the next one, do you think you could follow that model? And I'll literally, sitting with them on a Zoom in a Teams call, word by word, click by click, helping them, just being as they say in neurodiversity, what is it, body doubling. It works for everybody, whether you're neurodiverse or not. Being just sitting down, it works for my wife to do financial stuff. Like if I just sit on the couch with her, she'll get it done. If I don't, she won't. So that was I think a necessary secret.
I see we have another question in the chat, and I know we're almost out of time, but how did you identify these issues in the first place? I in my role, I just listen for them or I look for them. I think Ellen and I are both puzzle solvers. And so when we're talking with our colleagues or, anytime we're interacting with our colleagues, I think we're always listening for opportunities.
Awesome. Well, thank you two so much for your presentation and all your insights. We really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who came and asked questions. And yeah, thanks for coming. I think this is the last session slot of the day or something. So thank you all for coming to this. It's been great.